It's no exaggeration to say that Oblivion has been a part of my life for longer than it hasn't. In fact, that's literally mathematically true. I first played it when I was 12, and I'm 28 now. In that time, I've made dozens of different characters for dozens of different playthroughs. And suffice it to say, my playstyle has changed a lot over 16 years, even accepting that I don't play nearly as much as I used to. As luck would have it, I actually remember how my first playthrough went pretty well. Well, luck and the realization even back then that Oblivion constituted something of a turning point for me. So with some of the news that's been going around recently, I thought I'd do something of an experiment, comparing how my average run goes these days to my recollection of the very first time I ever played. Not the entirety of either run, which would make this video prohibitively long, but enough to make my point. That point being, well, I'm not going to bury the lead, it's right down there, beneath the video screen you're watching, at least until the next YouTube UI change. That said, I think it's a more nuanced point than might appear at first, so I do hope you stick around. Now, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Wow, apologies to Nurbit, that was terrible. Starting with character creation. Nowadays, when I boot up Oblivion, I only do so to play through one or two of my favorite quest lines rather than the whole game, so my character build reflects that. Today, I'm running through my personal favorite, the Dark Brotherhood. Honestly, there aren't really any racial stat bonuses that affect that questline one way or the other, so I'm going with the Red Guard because I think they're cool. Not going to bother with changing his face or anything, since I don't really care about character aesthetics at this point, and his name is just going to be the letter A because I don't want to bother with coming up with a clever name. That done, I wake up in a prison cell I've seen 1,000 times and get taunted by a dark elf I've been taunted by 1,000 times. Honestly, a big reason why I play through the Dark Brotherhood questline so often is because it affords a chance to kill this guy. A moment later, we meet the guy from Space Trek, or whatever, who informs us that we are, in fact, the protagonist. Good thing, too, it'd be kinda awkward if we weren't. We climb into the spaceman's secret hole, and the tutorial begins in earnest. Honestly, I've frequently considered installing a mod that skips the tutorial entirely, or just making a save at the end of it, but I'm lazy, so I haven't gotten around to it. Okay, here's the first thing I like to do on a run like this. I'll need a pretty high stealth skill for the Dark Brotherhood, and this is the first place to grind that out. So I go into stealth mode and start crawling against the wall. It takes a couple of tries this time, but eventually I find a spot that works and hit the auto move key. Then I go find something else to do for a while. I'm actually not cooking anything in this, I just like watching it go. Anyway, back to the game after a few minutes, and definitely not just opening the console and adjusting it that way, we have a respectable stealth skill now. We progress a bit further, hear Patrick Stewart say the line that was in all the trailers back in the day, pick whatever birth sign that has stealth as a skill, and make it to the end of the sewers, and by extension, finally, the end of the tutorial. Now, to get into the Dark Brotherhood, we have to do a murder. If I was also planning to do the arena, I'd just get to the end of that, since killing the Grand Champion after doing his side quest does count, but I don't want to go through all of that. So I'm just going to go kill a homeless person. If my channel ever gets popular enough to have out-of-context compilations, I imagine that line will be in pretty much all of them. Anyway, we find one asleep on the waterfront right next to the Thieves Guild meeting. Now to go to sleep, and practically there's no reason not to just sleep right there in the bedroll our friend was sleeping on.
You sleep rather soundly for a murderer.
Nah man, this bed sucks. Lucian gives us Keanu Reeves' favorite weapon, the blade of woe. Yeah, I deserve that. Anyway, he gives us the blade of woe and the Dark Brotherhood questline begins. I'm not going to go over all of it, but it goes roughly like this.
Who is this?
Oh no, what am I to do?
Stop right there! Then...
Why, brother?
Night, mother, I beg your mercy.
Okay.
It's all over!
Show me where you want.
By the knuckles! Destroy your night mother, and the dark brotherhood will fall.
The traitor's too rich. He's Matthew Brown. Do not let him walk the night. Kill him.
Yeah, that's still fun. Brief and probably fairly obvious disclaimer, this isn't actual footage of my first run. I didn't exactly have an Elgato running into my PS3 back in 2007-ish, so that first run is lost to time. This is a recreation to the best of my memory, which will inevitably be inaccurate in some places. Anyway, it's important to note that even on my first playthrough, I didn't go into Oblivion fully blind. I first heard about it on XPlay, remember that? And had heard from them that character creation could be pretty involved, so I was prepared to spend a long time on it. Then I clicked over once, saw the Khajiit option, and my mind was pretty much made up. After freestyling the sliders for a bit and ending up with a Lovecraftian horror beyond all reasonable human comprehension, I gave him a fitting name, then started the game in earnest. Like every playthrough does, my first playthrough started with being insulted by Valen Dreth. You can choose to believe me or not when I say this, but I distinctly remember thinking, for a moment, God, I hope I get to kill you later. Anyway, moments later, Uriel Septim and his guards walked into my cell, and I first heard the dialogue that has been etched into my lizard brain ever since.
Let me see your face. You are the one from my dreams.
I jested earlier, but even with my limited knowledge of just how important Patrick Stewart was back then, hearing a voice like that in a video game definitely knocked my socks off. As I walked through the hole in the wall, the tutorial began in earnest. Honestly, if I actually did have footage of that first playthrough from back then, my hunch is that it wouldn't look profoundly different from how my average tutorial playthrough looks now. After all, there are only so many different ways you can play through a small linear dungeon designed to guide your actions closely. But internally, things were quite different. For one, I remember being a little overwhelmed by how much stuff there was to do. At first, all I really retained was that I was supposed to swing my sword around until the thing in front of me was dead, and that, if I was about to be dead, hit the don't die button to heal myself. It took months for me to actually get a full handle on all you can do in Oblivion. And it's easy to forget this in hindsight, but I think all of these mechanics being introduced so quickly with barely time to parse it all, it asks questions of the player. What do you think the world outside is like? A world where you can do all of these things and more. It must be massive, right? Aren't you excited to see it for the first time? I was. I really, really was. And after witnessing the death of Uriel Septim, a death of supreme lore importance, which I had no idea of at the time, and picking whatever character class Boris suggested, I finished the very last section of the tutorial and exited the sewers into the wider world. And even now, I remember just how much it floored me. The first thing I did with my newfound freedom was swim over to the nearby Ayleid ruin to investigate. I wanted to go inside, but after nearly dying to the first bandit I saw, I decided not to risk it. So I opened the map and looked for the nearest city. And I kid you not about one word of this, not only did I not realize how fast travel worked, despite the game literally just explaining it, but I somehow missed that at the start of the game, you spawn right outside the single largest city. I know. I don't know how I did that either. Anyway, that perfect storm of stupidity meant that my plan became walking to Cheydinhal. So I did that. It's not the most scenic route in the game. Some pretty foliage, maybe a guard on horseback or two, the occasional bandit, but not much else. But as I neared my destination and saw the city walls peek out from behind the trees, it felt like my journey was worth it. Within the lore of Oblivion, Cheydinhal is, frankly, a shithole, to the point where multiple side quests deal with how corrupt the city is. But seeing it for the first time, I didn't care about all that. To me, it was beautiful. Upon my arrival, I realized that it was late in real life, I mean, and it being a school night, I needed to go to bed. So I went to the nearest inn and settled in for the night. The following day, as you've probably felt yourself at some point, I spent the entire day at school eager to get home to play again. At time of writing, opinion on Bethesda is pretty divided. You've probably seen videos arguing that the Todd Howard style of game design doesn't really work anymore, or even that it never really worked in the first place. And many of those criticisms are reasonable. The games, in allowing you to do pretty much anything, don't actually work very well as role-playing games. The drip feed of incremental difficulty, epitomized in Oblivion by its deeply restrictive leveling system, makes the world feel less lived in and more like a Truman Show styled to fit the player exactly. And the games rely so much on just having a lot to do that the moment-to-moment gameplay is frequently lacking. But I'd like to paraphrase F. Scott Fitzgerald and say that the people who sneer most bitterly at Todd Howard frequently do so while drunk on the courage of his liquor. Think about it this way. These big, systemic design critiques are not something you realize at a cursory glance. They're something you notice after either playing a lot or spending time in an environment where other people are playing a lot. As it happens, Bethesda have been omnipresent in AAA games for decades, so pretty much everyone who thinks critically about games has found themselves in one of those two contexts, as have many people who design games who have in some ways made their work as a response to it. So yeah, with all of that in mind, of course there are going to be a lot of people making the argument that no Bethesda game is a patch on Disco Elysium or Baldur's Gate 3. And I'm not going to debate that point, not least of which because, as I am now, I probably agree with it. But years ago, when I was entering these worlds for the first time and experiencing them in the wide-eyed wonder of youth, none of that mattered. And I don't think I was wrong to be moved in that way back then, just because I'm not moved in quite the same way anymore. Our relationship to art should change as we change. That's not an indictment on the art itself. Look, I don't know if the planned remake of Oblivion will have the same impact on younger players that it had on me. Maybe it will. Or maybe the industry has changed so much in so many fundamental ways that it won't. But neither prospect especially bothers me. If the world has fully moved on past Cyrodiil, then I accept that. But I'll never regret the time I spent there.